Well, we're really glad to see you all here. We originally planned these sessions to be on site for the first time in whatever more than a year, but then by the time we were done planning and the time of the sessions came, then as you all know, COVID caused us to go back online. But it can still be very good. We have a lot of experience now with doing online discussion sessions, and we believe it can generate the same energy and the same inspirations that you can get when you do things on site. So what we'll do in today's meeting is we're basically going to set the stage for the discussion series. We want to provoke you with some questions and thoughts, and we want to listen to you, what you have to say, what you're expecting from the series. We want to hear from your experiences with working with mixed methods and mixed data research. And we want to develop initial ideas today that we can take with us in the coming sessions, and that we can question the panelists for all the items that we find interesting to talk and think about. The discussion series is meant to be a free space to think out loud. There's no pressure to come up with final answers because frankly we also don't have them. We know there's a great interest in mixed methods research and working with mixed data. We also know that it's extremely hard. So we can read handbooks, but it's very often also it's very interesting to have discussions. Sometimes it's even more interesting to have discussions than to read the handbooks. So we want to, what we try with this series is to really move beyond the observation that mixed methods are useful. I think all of you have seen them in journals where people go like, well, a mixed methods approach would be great, but do we know how? Can we do it? How can we do it? What does it mean? What does it imply for our thinking about the object that we're looking at when we do mixed methods and we work with mixed data sources? What does it require from us in terms of recasting research, the reframing of the research? What does it mean to us in terms of interrogating our epistemological and ontological ideas about how the world works and how the world can be known? So these are the type of questions we want to address in this series. Again, we want to come up with answers, probably not final answers, but still we try to generate some answers there. And I'm extremely pleased that Federica and Sofia and I, as the people organizing this series, are supported by the Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Amsterdam. I'm also extremely pleased that Huub is with us today. So I would first like to give Huub the opportunity to say a few things about why he thinks that this series is important, and then we'll take it back.
Well, thank you, Lasse. Yes, welcome everybody. Also on my behalf at the opening of this seminar series, the practice of mixed methods and mixed data research. My name is Huub Dijksterblom. I'm the scientific director of the IAS, and I'm extremely glad that the three of you took the initiative to organize this. At the IAS, as you will know, we bring together a research community that nurtures all kinds of creative transdisciplinary thought. We aim to foster a vibrant and inspiring environment where novel ideas are sparked and new collaborations are formed between researchers from all academic disciplines. And we offer an interdisciplinary research, we offer interdisciplinary research teams a home, usually a physical home, but also a Zoom space, where they can work together and utilize the synergy potential with other activities at the Institute. I think the core of the Institute is the development of methodologies to foster interdisciplinary research. And specifically in our foundations and methods program, we pay attention to questions of causality, emergence, evidence-based research, simulation-based science, foundations of complex systems, and the governance of complex systems. Well, these questions are urgent. Discussions between quantitative and qualitative approaches are left with many unresolved issues. And the rise of data science and algorithmic thinking asks for reflection on the epistemological frameworks that are applied, for instance, in computational models. More in general, this seems to be the moment to put philosophy of science issues central stage again, to facilitate a dialogue between different approaches and to make the assumptions that underpin various methodologies more explicit. Meanwhile, I think everybody will recognize that the task ahead is enormous. Theory construction and combining approaches is just a complicated affair that requires a lot of work, patience, and above all, curiosity in what drives other researchers. So meetings at the IAS, and today will be no exception, therefore concern much more than discussing chapters of the Philosophy of Science handbook. Above all, it's about starting conversations, meeting different disciplines and different viewpoints, and exploring if we can work together by constructing theoretical frameworks and combining methodological approaches. I'm confident that this series will contribute to this task, and I very much look forward to the series. Thank you for that. Let's give the floor to you, but not before briefly introducing you to the community here. First of all, Federica Russo. She's a philosopher of science and technology at the University of Amsterdam. Lasse Gerrits, professor of urban planning at the Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies at Erasmus University Rotterdam. And Sofia Pagliarin, she's a researcher of urban development at Erasmus University Rotterdam. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Huub. Thanks a lot, and thanks for hosting us. Even if it's a Zoom environment rather than the actual building, but perhaps, who knows? We don't know what the next weeks will have for us. So perhaps there will be an opportunity to meet again on site. Who knows? How did this series come about? Well, to be fair, it is in many ways it's a spin-off of the Causality series that Federica Russo hosted some time ago. And when that series took place, Federica and I kept talking about the really cool ideas that popped up in that, and we felt the need to have another series that would focus much more on mixed methods and mixed data, but in many ways as a spin-off of the Causality discussion series. And somehow Federica and Sofia got in touch, and I don't quite remember how, but we just figured along the way that the three of us actually know each other very well, and that we have a common interest in this series and bringing it forward. So it was a no-brainer basically to develop this series with the three of us, and we had some online sessions to brainstorm about what we could organize, and mostly about the motives why we would want to organize this series. And we also reached out to other colleagues to find out what they would like to hear about. And we often found that we all in this room today, with other colleagues too, struggle with the same issues when we try to do mixed methods research and work with mixed data sources. So there are strong motives to have this series, and I would like to invite Federica and Sofia also to say a few things about their motives and their reasons why they're here today and why they put the time and effort in doing this. Federica, may I start with you?
Yeah, thanks. So, as Huub said, indeed, I'm a philosopher of science and technology, and one big theme that has been present in my research since the very beginning is causality. But I'm not that kind of philosopher who wants to pin down once and for all what causality is. I am rather interested in understanding how we come to establish causal relations. And especially, I've been always intrigued by the difficult cases, because usually physicists know it all and it is nice and clear in their ideal settings of the experiments. But then you talk to social scientists or you look at the health sciences and it is all messy. And one part of this messiness that I'm really intrigued about is when you have to use so you have to mix methodologies. And so that is my perspective in there. I want to understand how can you use different methodologies for the same purpose? How can you combine them? How they relate to different concepts of causality, or can you unify them under one concept? But I don't want to do this in the abstract. I want to do it much in the practice, and therefore I want to talk to the practitioners once the collaboration with Lasse and Sofia and this series.
Thanks a lot, Federica. Sofia, please.
Yeah, thanks. So I am a sociologist by education and a qualitative researcher, but I also define myself as a comparativist. So I like comparative research, and for me, the challenge of multi-methods and multi-data research is only part of the story, because then I'm also interested in how to translate findings or data to other cases and to make a comparison across cases. My main interest in this series was to try to find out ways through which we can combine ways of working with data and also findings and also across cases actually. And I struggled myself as a researcher with multi-methods and multi-data research when in my own research on the analysis of land development. So I had this part of spatial planning that was looking at the processes of how governance processes and spatial plans, and so how they would impact land use decisions. And on the other hand, I did a land use analysis, so where land use modelers have a different approach on the same land transformations. And so I was always struggling to see, given the same focus of analysis, how different methods were used and also how different ways of looking at the same thing were there. So that's where my main interest lies, and I hope through the series that we will have a lot of discussions, as Lasse said before, on different ways to frame our ontology and epistemology as researchers and methodologists, and then to translate it also to a mixed method or methodological approach.
Thanks a lot, Sofia. Much appreciated. And I will ask and invite you all to think about this question. So why are you here? I don't mean the philosophical version, but the simple version. What do you expect to find in this series, and what drives you towards mixed methods and working with mixed data sources? So that's a question I want to ask you to reflect on. So you have a few minutes to think about it, because I'll first explain why I'm in this series, and then I get back to you. So I've been doing complexity science since forever, an eternity and a day. And complexity science is dominated by quantitative modeling approaches, and I understand where it's coming from. It's not my background though. I'm trained as a qualitative researcher. So going into the complexity sciences for me was a hell of a ride. Very interesting indeed. I can see how you can do complexity in a quantitative way. I can see how you can do it in a qualitative way. But I just don't see it gel yet, not yet. I don't see it coming together, not yet. So I have lots of questions about this. And in my view, and please don't mind me provoking for a moment, but in my view, the domination of the quantitative methods in complexity sciences is in some ways very easy. And that is because numbers are abstract. And so, you know, we can express a lot of things by numbers, even through association. And then on the other side, we have the qualitative methods those methods are much more concrete. They are less abstract, they're vague, but that's a different thing. They're less abstract, and they have to do the heavy burden. They have to account for case properties, for example. And because that qualitative side also does not communicate well, people move into very vague terms and use jargon and concepts that can be interpreted in so many ways that we still don't know what we're talking about. So, on the one hand, we have quantitative methods that look very firm and established because it's numbers, it's solid, but actually also very abstract, and therefore not always representing of properties. And on the other hand, we've got qualitative methods that do this heavy burden, they do the heavy work in cases, but by definition are often undefined or underdefined to start with, vague, can mean multiple things at the same time, and so on. So I'm stuck. And now I want to know how we can get out of this conundrum. How can we move away from saying it's either this or that? I'm sure there are ways in which we can combine different methods, and I'm sure there are ways in which we can combine these different data sources. But how? I do not know yet. I see a lot of books, handbooks, and papers saying that multi-method research and mixed method research is the new black, and I agree. But now we need to do it, and that's the hard bit. So that is why I feel that this series comes at the right time. Now, that's a lot of blah blah from my side. I've bought you at least 3 minutes to think about this question: why are you in this series? So I would like to invite you to say a few things about what you expect from this series, and also perhaps reflect on experiences you have had with working with mixed methods and mixed data sources. Who would like to go first? You can raise your hand or virtual or switch off your camera quickly. René, please.
Yes, thanks a lot for setting up this series. So I thought I'd raise my hand quickly. That is also because I need to leave at 1:30. So then at least I had the opportunity to also give something of my say. I was thinking to add to your to let's say the links, the linkage between qualitative and quantitative. I in the field of medical science, where I come from, where let's say evidence-based medicine is sort of a religion, I think there's two other axes that I would like to add to, let's say, the axis of qualitative versus quantitative, and that is of reductionist versus let's say complexity, because I think you mentioned that I mean, these are already people who sort of have embraced this complexity. Okay, they work on qualitative and quantitative work, but at least they have embraced, let's say, a systemic perspective. And I come from a field where the reductionism is king, right? So and we need reductionism. So how can we sort of link those two things? And the other element that I thought is important also to provide is linkage of empiricism and theory. We have, of course, I mean, in what is also king in medicine is empirical data, right? So it doesn't exist if it's not if there are no data. And I think there is a value of theoretical understanding. And the reason that we sort of got rid of theory is because in medicine was, let's say, before the arrival of evidence-based medicine, was dominated by experts coming up with wonderful theories, and they dominated science. And evidence-based medicine has brought a lot of, let's say, a benefit to the field. But now this moved into this direction that we sort of have an allergy for theory, and I think that that's a bad thing for our field. So that were the two elements that I thought to add.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. May I ask you one question about the expert knowledge? Where is it now? How is it encapsulated in the evidence that is generated?
Yeah, well, we have this evidence hierarchies. It's in the bottom. So typically, so if we develop clinical guidelines, I think it's considered to be rubbish, garbage, hardly informative. At the same time, so this is, let's say, when we develop medicine as a science. But there's also, of course, this idea of medicine as a practice, clinicians practicing, and I think their clinical intuitions and their expertise plays a huge role. But we sort of have put this under the carpet when it concerns, let's say, the science side of it, and when we develop clinical guidelines, and this also creates, let's say, this cognitive dissonance between let's say what's in the guidelines and what clinicians feel that they, because these guidelines, they also start offering a legal framework that sort of, let's say, tells what is good clinical practice. So that is, I think there's a lot of tension in this.
Absolutely, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, thanks so much. We will. I think I'm quite sure we will return to this topic in this series. Thanks. Barry, please.
Yeah, hi, Lasse. First, it's great to be here and hear these things discussed. What I want to get out of this, I'm a PhD student at the Open University in the UK. I'm actually based in Sweden. I am working with bringing the complexity sciences into software engineering. And there's a bit of a meltdown when you start to bring that kind of thinking into very reductionist, very traditional ways of thinking about design, where the people driving things tend to, like me, have a background in mathematics. And that's led me in my work and my experimental design to wander off the reservation completely into the philosophy of science, and I'm feeling a bit lost. and so I'm working with things like ideas like deconstruction and how we interpret what's happening in social environments and turn that into mathematical structures in software. So I'm hoping to see how other people are doing it, because I feel like I'm inventing things all the time because I have to, and I'd love to see who else is inventing things and what else has been invented. I also have obviously an interest in causality as well. So I'm here because of the Twitter streams.
I figured. Very good. Thanks a lot for that. Maybe as a follow-up question also from my side, what is the biggest criticism that you receive when you bring in your ideas to your audience?
It's I think you've already mentioned it. It's a problem of formalism, and so I'm being pushed to. So I've defined a number of concepts that make it easier for software engineers to describe things that aren't concrete, that aren't solid, because that's a huge problem for them. How do they describe uncertainty in their environments? The concepts that I've introduced then get criticized because they're not formally defined. And my argument is, if I formally define them, they just fall into the same bucket as everything else in software engineering, and they'll fail in the same way. And so the biggest problem I have now is making that argument that the way to formalism in these complex systems is to abandon our old ideas of formalism, and that creates a lot of emotions as well as arguments.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that. I can imagine that. But it's a thought-provoking idea. That's very interesting. Yeah, this is definitely on our agenda for this series.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks a lot for that. John, please.
Yeah, I must say I have a more concrete and a more generic sort of interest. Generic interest is much similar to what Lasse just expressed. I myself also been working on using complexity studies to integrate insights from various perspectives. So the more specific one. The more generic one is that I'm a physicist by training and a social scientist by profession. And given the sort of question I'm asking in my work, I am a social scientist who's mainly using qualitative research methods. But simultaneously, I'm pretty eclectic in my thinking, and I'm puzzled for a long time already by the fact that while I was brought up in physics with an emphasis on the need to interpret all the time your variables, your theoretical concepts and reality in each other's light, and therefore giving meaning to the things was really important in theorizing properly, in measuring properly, and in reasoning in between the two, so to say. Then when I went to social science, and also when I started to work on health science and indeed evidence-based medicine, it became clear to me that so many quantitative scholars in that sort of areas leave the interpretation part out, and there's sort of a false juxtaposition then between quantitative and qualitative, and it's assumed that qualitative just involves much more interpretation than quantitative, but I actually don't buy that. And since then I'm wondering how precisely the role of interpretation is in both, and what that means for better understanding how they relate to each other, and how they together can contribute to resolving particular research problems. And for me, getting some more grip on that particular puzzle is one major motivation to participate.
Yeah, very good and very clear also, John. Thanks a lot for that. And I think interpretation is something that many of us will struggle with, and it's also, you cannot formalize interpretation. That's a different quality that we require from people. That's very hard. How do when you talk to your former colleagues in physics, how do they respond to these issues?
Well, I learned from them how indeed, especially from well, not especially, but including my later promoter, whom I'm frequently talking to, he indeed was the sort of person who, for instance, raised questions like, why did we call this Heisenberg principle an uncertainty principle rather than an improbability principle? Yeah, he raised that sort of questions during lecture. Yeah, and that meant he was indeed asking for the interpretation of theoretical concepts. So he would strongly recognize my current interest. I maybe have learned it from him, and from others as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, for sure.
So they would see the point, definitely.
Yeah, I would see the point indeed. Yeah. Very good. Thanks, John, and welcome.
Yeah.
Roel, please.
Yes, thank you. I come from a QCA background, so it's qualitative comparative analysis, where you have a cross-case comparison of cases to find out maybe something about causality. But many people want to follow that up with within case studies. And then it often happens that people use process tracing or different kinds of similar kinds of method that look at causal change. And I'm thinking, well, that's a very different way of thinking about causality than the kind of configurational causality that you use in QCA. So maybe these methods are not compatible. So that leads me to ask the question, okay, so what is, if you want to use different methods, if you want to use mixed methods, you need to think about what causality means for you, what causality means in the particular context that you're researching, and then use methods that are compatible with that definition of causality. So that's the way, how I approach, how I start thinking about these issues of mixed method. And I'm working on a few papers now where I try to elaborate the notion that if you want to do research well, if you want to do causal explanation well, you need to achieve some kind of unity between philosophy, method, and theorizing. I have some ideas about that, and well, maybe this group is a nice opportunity to see what other people think of this idea, how that resonates.
And when you take that question to the QCA folks, to what extent do they reflect on the assumption about causality that's underneath QCA as a set theoretical method?
Well, I think the difficulty about that is that there really is not a real understanding of what causality is in QCA. It's configurational, but that doesn't answer the more fundamental question. Is it about regularities? Is it about interpretation? Is it about mechanisms? You can look at causality in QCA through all these different lenses. I prefer to have a critical realist powers-based approach to causality. And I've recently published a paper on that. It leads to some kind of confusion about this issue among QCA colleagues, because there's a strong tendency in QCA for a very empirical regularity way of looking at causality. And I tend to have some annoying questions for them when they come up with those ideas. But it leads to interesting debate, so that's fine.
Annoying questions are really important, because that tells you something. Then you're onto something. That's very good. Thank you so much, Roel. Irina, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Irina. I'm an assistant professor in communication science, and so also part of the social sciences. And I've been using quantitative methods, qualitative methods. QCA is for me quantitative content analysis, but I've also been using qualitative case studies. And I actually interested in bringing them together, but my starting point of thinking is more from the theory. So my question is, or what I'm struggling with is, how can we best confirm, but even more important, set up, develop new theory based on mixed methods, and which aspects of the qualitative parts and of the quantitative parts can we best use to establish these theories? On the one hand, to really have meaningful theory, but also to have that accepted in the field. So that would be my take on that.
What have you discovered so far in doing this? What was your most important discovery?
That it is for communication scientists, it's pretty hard to get. They always come from theory and they want to confirm theory. It's barely the other way around. And if it's the other way around, it's purely conceptual. Usually, that's the starting point. So it's always the conceptual starting point and then confirming by theory. It's not that often the other way around, coming from the kind of, come from the observation to theory.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the accepted way of doing things. And so it becomes pretty hard to come from the observation and set up new theory. Also because we, of course, have loads of not so well-defined concepts, as in all social sciences, right? Where we can define trust in 5,000 different ways, but still don't know what it actually is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are still pockets in the social sciences that believe that are completely coherent and consistent, but it's just a few pockets.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Very good. Thanks a lot for being here. Anyone else? So far, it has been really nice, so one after the other. Is there anyone else who would like to comment on that question? What interests you in this series? Esther, please. Apart from that, we invited you, of course.
Yes, you invited me, so I felt obliged to be here. I'm a literary scholar, so I guess I'm sort of at the other extreme of what René was talking about. I'm in a discipline where people are frankly rather suspicious of anything that's quantitative and also anything that's empirical. I mean, there are empirical literary scholars, but they're sort of in a peripheral part of our field, and quantitative stuff is still seen as a bit suspicious, trendy. You know, the money seems to be went there for a while, sort of digital humanities stuff, which seemed in my field not to extend much beyond just making databases of stuff and then trying to answer questions that actually trying to answer the same questions with these different methods. And I think that's where I come down in this kind of method discussion, where I find it really interesting to see what different questions you can answer with different methods. And I think that's where using a variety of methods becomes interesting, because it does allow you to approach the same object with different questions and to get different answers. I mean, myself, I'm still mostly working with quantitative, I would guess you would just say interpretation. And that's pretty much what we do. We interpret and then we check whether other people find our interpretation convincing or not. And that's how you then establish whether your work is successful or not. But I now have a research project which is about the imagination of the rural. So I'm working a lot with geographers, also people in economics. So I'm using a lot more empirical research as a kind of touchstone for my own work on literature, film, and television. So I also wonder how to make that work, right? So not if you're doing yourself mixed methods, but also if you need to rely on research by people in other disciplines using very different methods from you yourself, and how do you then integrate that successfully and usefully for both you and these other researchers in what you end up writing. So I guess those are the questions that I'm working on. And next week I'm going to do a little presentation, so you'll hear more from me then.
Perfect, and we're very grateful for that. I also like the way how you phrased the interpretation as a convincing instead of wrong or right interpretation. I like that. It's very
well
good.
I think that was what I was thinking when at the beginning we were thinking about how the world can be known. I think for me that would already be a wrong way of putting it. So I would be more inclined to say how the world can be thought, and then you already have a completely different departure point, and then interpretation becomes very much one of the dominant ways, and maybe not so problematic as it seems to be in some disciplines. But I do think that the kind of suspicion and kind of knee-jerk rejection of quantitative research in large part of the humanities is actually a problem too that needs to be addressed. So I'm also hoping for arguments in this discussion to convince my colleagues that quantitative research does have a place and that it can work productively together with the sort of qualitative stuff that we do.
Thanks a lot. I totally now want to go into that topic of can you know the world, but I'll hold that off for next week then. We will get back to that topic then. Very good. Thanks a lot, Esther. And again, also thanks for presenting next week. It's really great. Anyone else still to give an opinion? Justus, yes. I was just going to say Justus. Justus, by all means.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I think one of the main reasons I'm interested in this series is that I've always practiced in a very ad hoc fashion, very intuitively. I never gave very much consideration to the sort of philosophy behind my decisions. And I think it would be very helpful if I learned to like reflect more systematically on the choices that I make and the sort of philosophical underpinning. So I think that's one very important reason. Another important reason is more personal. Like I switched from sociology to geography and not so very long ago. And so this also confronted me with the question whether there is something like a geographical way of producing knowledge. And I'm not sure if I have the answer to that question yet, but I do think that geography as a discipline is much more open to mixed methods. It's much more open to situated, contingent, situated explanations, contingent explanation. So I find it intriguing to think about whether perhaps geography as a discipline is more open or more suitable for these mixed method approaches.
Where do you think that comes from?
Well, there's I did give it some thoughts, and there are several answers, but let me just pick like one very basic one. So geographers tend to study a particular place, and typically in that place many different things come together. So many other people, for instance, many sociologists, first make the move of abstracting from a particular place the set of relationships that they're interested in. So they would be interested, for instance, in social cohesion, and then they would extract the information relating to social cohesion from that particular locality that they're interested in. But then geographers would say, well, yeah, but social cohesion, that probably takes on a very particular meaning in the context that you're studying it. So you're all the time drawn to context to take into account numerous variables and how they interact in particular situations. So I think that might explain why geographers are also more open or more inclined to use mixed methods.
And earlier on, you said that you had on consideration you make intuitive choices between using methods. Where does that intuition come from?
Well, I think that most people most of the time use mixed methods in their everyday life, and the question would rather be how do people learn to kick that habit and choose on a particular set of methods? Because to me, it requires quite a level of conviction to do that, and to confidently say on the basis of a single method that you have reached a particular conclusion. So yeah, I prefer to turn that question around.
Yeah, great. Well done. There was a boomerang. Have something to do with that too, and established practices, and those who hold power over the rules of what constitutes a good career in your field. Anyway, but that's just some preliminary thoughts. Anyone else at this stage? Gerben, please.
Yes, hi. Thank you for organizing this, because it's already really interesting. So thanks a lot. I'm joining in with this because I'm in general interested in methods. I'm a methodologist. I did a PhD on interviewing, qualitative interviews that I compared in a large-scale experiment with in total 214 qualitative interviews. So it was, I once used the title "Mixed Up" or "Mixed Methods." At least it was messing my brain up. But it was a very interesting study. I still think methodologically, it had a methodological focus, comparing different ways of interviewing, but it also methodologically was interesting because it was really a clash of different epistemologies, ontologies within the study. And I'm still triggered by these kind of studies, not just in mixing methods, but also very much in this merging methods that seem to be coming up a bit. but I'm also, and I teach methodologies. So I teach many courses, or all the courses I teach are on methods, from introductions to first year to research master and PhD classes. And it usually ends up somewhere mixed. And one of the things I always try to teach is that it's not about protocolizing research. And when I saw that there was going to be a seminar series, Christian told me, thanks Chris, that there was going to be a seminar series, the first thing I did was look up whether it was on protocols and protocolizing mixing methods in a Creswell-like way. And I'm terribly annoyed by people that turn methods into things, into thingies, or thinginess, as Bible calls them, and either when it's it doesn't really matter whether that is on a qualitative or on a quantitative or on a mixed method side, or if we can distinguish them because we all do interpretation anyway. So, and I was really happy to see already from the program that was exactly not the case. So I'm mostly here to get inspired and to listen and see what I can learn from you all. Oh yes, and I in my current research collaboration with Christian, we use loads and loads of qualitative material that we try to analyze collaboratively in order to do some reduction without becoming a reductionist.
Thank you so much. That's really beautiful. And may I ask you to respond to the comment that Justus made earlier about people somewhere down the line kicking their habit of working with multiple methods and focusing on one. Since you're teaching this, are you the one who's doing that?
I was triggered by Justus saying that. I was triggered by two things: that the intuition bit, and I always did it. And I think it's a smart thing to do, because the nicest mixed method research I come across is mixed method research where people do not discuss extensively whether they did qualitative before quantitative and thus do this, or whether people are believers of qualitative comparative analysis, also as a form of religion. Who can relate to that? I think people have a tendency to turn to religion anywhere. So I don't know, Justus, whether it is unlearning something, but at one point either it gives more satisfaction. It's really cool to do participant observation and say, oh, other methods are really bad. And it's also lovely to sit behind your computer and do all kinds of analysis and solve puzzles all day. So I don't know whether people are unlearning it or people are being pulled in or lured in by other elements. But we might have a psychologist here who can say more about that.
I'm checking the screen right now. Yeah, at least one person I know could comment on this, but anyway, thanks. That's really great. And it's in response to what you just said. I remember posting something, a sort of similar question some time ago on Twitter, and there was a conversation about this matter or that matter, and then someone came back to me and says, what does it matter as long as you've learned something new? And I thought that's a very nice way to reducing all the discussions. Yeah, if you learn something new, it's actually a very good question, and if you did, then great. Also, I've taken note of the term messed up methods. I will use that more in conversations. Thanks a lot. Anyone else who would like to join this little discussion? Then this is the right opportunity for us to present the rest of the series, to discuss a bit about what the sessions that we will have and the topics that come with that. And now we will turn to what is probably the most dreaded part of any Zoom meeting, namely, let me share my screen with you. But I prepared this, ladies and gentlemen, so it should be fine this time. Here we go. I will not ask you if you can see it, because I think you can. All right. Then it always does this thing. Never mind. This is a PowerPoint slide, ladies and gentlemen. You have seen it before. So this is what the program looks like in the coming weeks. On December 10th, so that's next week, we will talk about the qualitative nature of quantitative data, and we're extremely glad that Esther's volunteered to be one of the discussants, and Frank Pijpers will be the other one, which is absolutely great. Why do we want to talk about this? It's because as I said already in my own little chat in introduction, that the quantitative data kind of seduces our audience in giving the impression that everything is firm and clear and a given and that you don't need to think about it. So basically the rigor of numbers, if you will, whereas qualitative data does not always give that. But importantly also, the production of quantitative data is embedded in all kinds of qualitative assessments, not just assessments, but practices too, and interpretation, as some people have already mentioned today. So in this session, we really want to touch upon that. We want to talk about the reasons why quantitative data is seen as objective, but also how we that's not the right way of phrasing it, not just objective, but why quantitative data has this veneer of being solid and clear, whereas in reality it's being produced in certain settings that have all the vagaries of qualitative research and qualitative data. So that it will be the session next week, and then after that, so we have the Christmas break obviously, and then we will move to January the 14th, where we will talk about the quantification of qualitative data. Sofia, please.
Yes. Yeah, the session on the 14th of January will be a kind of symmetrical to the one that we will have next week. So we will ask about how do we give numbers to meanings, or how do we give numbers to qualitative data, because of course quantification means scales, counting, defining levels, and then construct models. And how does it pan out in qualitative research, or which are the ways through which we can meaningfully do that in, when using qualitative data without actually by respecting the nature of qualitative data as messy, indeterminate sometimes, and heterogeneous. So this will be a bit the question, and as Lasse introduced in the beginning, we are not here to find answers, of course, but to talk about and discuss about the different ways through which we can do that. And then this session will also, or a part of the session will talk about calibration, which is one of the main procedures in a qualitative comparative analysis, because also, I mean, we are there are quite a bit of people here that come from that side too, because for us it is as the name says, I mean, as the title of this method, or the the words that compose the acronym QCA, qualitative comparative analysis. So qualitative is there, and so we will also connect it to that, to how does it, what does qualitative mean in a QCA when we transform meanings and qualitative data into numbers, in particular set theoretic methods, set theoretic values, sorry.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sofia. And then on January the 28th, we'll talk about the nature of data. Federica, perhaps you could say a few words about what we try to achieve in that session.
Yeah, just to say that, as you can imagine, after discussing the qualitative nature of quantitative data and then the symmetrical quantification of the qualitative, then we need to wrap up the discussion on data and try to come up with an idea of what data is, what is the nature of data. Is this nature very different in qualitative or quantitative settings? Does this refer to representation? Are they proxies? What do you make out of interviews and the kind of verbal material that you use in qualitative research settings? Is this related to objectivity? What kind of role do the researchers have in this objectivity and in the objectifications of whatever we study? So I was going to say we are going to solve the problem of data, but probably we are going to make it even more messier, and this is going to be fun. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And if you see that we have still some discussants to be announced, it does not mean that we don't have anyone, but we still seek for confirmation of dates. So don't worry about it. Every session will have 2 discussants to kick off the theme. On February 11th, we will talk about, as you can tell already, about the difference between small and big and medium, between small n studies and big N studies, and even the big data thing that is so big that it's called big, but it's bigger than big somehow. So we will talk about the question, or a couple of questions actually, including how many cases are enough. Are small N studies better or worse than big N studies? What is the difference anyway? And also, we will definitely touch upon big data too, because big data has the potential to make major changes to the way we approach research. For example, the statement that big data renders theory obsolete, which is, I think, lots of people will by now start to think of as something that may have been a bit far-stretched. But still, we will consider the nature of big data too. And of course, we'll look at the question if and to what extent big data is there to kill off the qualitative methods. So one big, thousands, many, whatever, that is the topic on February the 11th. And then moving on to February 25th, we will talk about synthetic and semantic structures. Sofia, please.
Yes, this will be one of the sessions in the series that is more theoretical, maybe, or we will anyway discuss about our models of reality, so that the ontology and epistemology that we bring in when doing mixed methods, and the fact that and if we can actually communicate, for instance, in interdisciplinary research teams, if these different ontologies and epistemologies can actually be made dialogue, or can actually communicate to make mixed method a practice. We will structure the discussion through the syntactic and semantic structure, so ways of thinking. And I think that listening to what you have, some of you have said previously, I think that this would be a session where to bring up more theory-related questions to mixed method research.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sofia. And then on March 11th, we will talk causality. Since we solved causality already in the series, this will only be one session, right, Federica?
Yeah, only one session, but it was already nicely introduced in the discussion today. So not a lot to be said, other than we are not going to give you the one definition of causality, but we will try to understand how causal concepts are involved in these mixed methods. And I also see people are leaving, but that is also okay.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. The last meeting in this session is where we do the actual thing. So there's a lot of pressure on the 2 speakers, Barbara Fitz and Lieselot van der Bussen, to come up with all the answers to all the questions that we have generated in the previous 2 months. But we will discuss the possible research designs that are there to work with, in a genuine way, work with mixed methods, and we will critically examine which one works, which don't work, and we also draw not just from the experience of the discussants, but all your experiences to see how we can make it work. So this, in an overview, is the entire program. I need to remind all participants to register per session. So if you have registered for the current session, then you're not automatically registered for the next sessions. And since we work with a limited and a capped number of people, we would like to ask you to register again for each session. If you cannot come, it's perfectly fine. I know some people are available later on or early on. That's perfectly fine. But we always want to keep the opportunity for other people to join if that's possible. So please register. And that wraps it up. We actually come to the end of the meeting today. I very much enjoyed the discussion we had so far. It was a really good input. I've taken lots of notes, lots of questions, and so I think our discussants have something to talk about too in the coming weeks. We will communicate with them, and hopefully generate some first tentative answers. We are very much about creating this dialogue here. So we hope that if you join again, that you will also engage in the dialogue and pose your questions and give your experiences, because very often we learn a lot from what people have actually experienced when doing a certain method, being in the field, and so on and so forth. I see a question from Barry, please.
Yeah, hi Lasse, is it possible for you just to share the link for registering for the next sessions in the chat?
Yeah, I'm looking at Federica right now. Federica, could you?
I'm not sure whether this has been created, so let me check with the admin people at the institute. Okay, so it will be circulated. The other thing that we can do more easily is that if you are already here and you know you will be coming next week, just leave a message in the chat and you will be automatically registered for next time, and then we will reopen registrations for extra participants.
And it's first comes, first serve. So if you put in your name now, then you're good.
Yeah, I'm going to make note.
Thank you so much, Federica. Any other questions at this stage? Not at all. Then please leave your name in the chat if you wish to join us, or I mean, I assume that the University of Amsterdam will also approach you by email for the link where you can register. I would like to thank you so much for being here today. It was a good kickoff, I believe. I feel that we have many great questions to work on, which we'll do, and hope to see you again soon next week with Esther and Frank. Thank you so much. Bye bye.